My psycho sister wailed on her autistic daughter to cure her, then convinced everyone the kid was crazy when she reported her, so I took her off her by force. A year later, she's on my doorstep begging me to give her daughter back. My sister is the type of person to miss her own child's birthday party because she forgot to schedule it into her calendar. So when her daughter Mia was born, I insisted on helping to take care of her. Plus, I had a baby at around the same time, so I always wanted them to be best friends. I treated her like she was my own. So when Mia was 13 and I got a call saying she wanted to stay with us for a while, I agreed. Mia showed up to my front door with tears streaming down her face. Her eyes were so puffy I could barely see them, and the tighter I hugged her, the more she cried. I invited her inside and grabbed her a tub of Ben & Jerry's cookie dough. I knew from experience that the more I pushed for answers, the more she would budge, so I let Mia take her time to answer, while I gently stroked her hair. Suddenly, she took her t-shirt off, and what I saw made me sick to the stomach. Littered on her tiny self were fresh bruises. I tried to keep my face calm, because I knew I had to be strong for her. This made her cry a little less. Honey, is it true that you came because you wanted to visit me? Suddenly, her eyes flashed with anger. I literally saw her knuckles go white with how hard she was tensed up. What the actual F? Did my effing mom tell you that? At this point, Mia was 13, so I thought I could trust her enough to tell the truth. I asked her what really happened. Turns out her relationship with her mom went south as soon as she turned 10, because that's when she was diagnosed with high-functioning autism disorder. And instead of, being a good parent and accepting her for who she is, her mom tried to beat it out of her. Mia told me that if her mom ever caught her stimming or trying to meditate to regulate her overstimulation, she would shout right in her ears. And recently she bought a speakerphone to amp up the autism healing. I felt myself choke up and sniffle to hold back the tears when she said that. In front of me was a kind and sweet girl that the world had been unkind to. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was for sure. There was no way she was going back to my sister's house. I promised she could stay as long as she wanted and handed her my phone so she could order noise-canceling headphones and a fidget cube of her choice. I could tell she appreciated it, because even through her tears, the corners of her lips moved slightly upwards. I had no idea this was the calm before the storm. At first, Mia was just quiet, staying in the guest room most of the time. I figured she was decompressing, so I gave her space. My own kids were a little confused about why their cousin wasn't talking to them like usual, but they didn't push it. Then, small things started to happen. My youngest, Timmy, came to me one day with a red mark on his arm. Mia pinched me, he whispered. I tried to talk to Mia about it, but she just stared at me with hollow eyes. I didn't do anything, so I convinced myself that it was a misunderstanding, but the incidents kept escalating. One night, I heard a scream from the bedroom. I rushed in to find Mia standing over my oldest daughter, Lily, who had a bloody nose. Mia was breathing heavily, while Matt looked up at me with terror in his eyes. I took her to the living room and tried to stay calm. What happened? She just shrugged, like she didn't even register what she'd done. I was caught between wanting to protect her and needing to keep my kids safe. The guilt was eating me alive. Over the next few weeks, Mia's behavior became more unpredictable. She would scream at the slightest noise, throw things when my kids laughed too loud, and once she pulled Timmy's hair so hard I had to pry her fingers off. I tried to be patient. I really did. But my kids were scared of their own home. One evening, after another meltdown where Mia threw my favorite vase at Lily and almost unalived her, I called my sister. I couldn't handle it anymore. I was desperate. She picked up straight away. What did she do now? When I explained everything, there was silence on the other end. Then she laughed. A sharp, cruel laugh. Of course she's acting crazy. She always has been. She gave herself those bruises. And that whole autism skit, she made it up for attention. I was stunned. Could I really have been that gullible? The doubt crept in like poison. The next morning, I sat Mia down. Your mom is coming to get you. I think it's best you go home. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just walked out the door with her backpack, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen anyone. I spent all night wondering if I had done the right thing. The next morning, I had my answer, because that's when I got the call. It was the police. Mia had been found after committing self-unalive. I immediately fell to the floor. My sister was evil, and I had left her in her clutches. I rushed to the hospital in a complete daze. I don't even remember the drive there. My husband stayed home with the kids, and I just kept repeating, fuck, fuck, fuck the entire way. The hospital parking lot was a blur. I think I might have parked illegally, but I didn't care. I just needed to see Mia. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and I nearly tripped getting out of the car, my body moving faster than my brain could process. When I got to the reception desk, I could barely form words. Mia, my niece, sewer slide attempt, where is she? The woman at the desk looked at me with those practiced, sympathetic eyes that hospital staff have. She asked if I was immediate family, and I just nodded. No time for explanations. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making my growing headache worse as I fidgeted impatiently, waiting for information. They directed me to the pediatric ICU on the 3rd floor. The elevator ride felt like it took years. The antiseptic smell made my stomach turn, and a janitor's cart blocked half the hallway, forcing me to squeeze past. When the doors finally opened, I saw my sister sitting in the waiting area, scrolling through her phone like she was waiting for a fucking oil change, not sitting outside her daughter's hospital room after a sewer slide attempt. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to grab her by the throat and demand how she could sit there so calmly, but I didn't. I just walked past her without a word and went straight to the nurse's station to ask about Mia. My sister didn't even look up as I passed, her manicured nails tapping away at her screen. She's stabilized, the nurse told me, her voice gentle but clinical. She took a large amount of pills, but they pumped her stomach in time. She's sedated right now. The nurse, her name tag read Diane, had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, the only warmth in this sterile environment. I asked if I could see her, and the nurse hesitated. She glanced over at my sister, who was now watching us with narrowed eyes. Only immediate family at this time, she said apologetically, shuffling some papers on her desk. My sister walked over, all fake concern now that someone was watching. I'll let you know when she wakes up, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You should go home to your kids. She placed a hand on my arm that looked comforting to anyone watching, but felt like ice through my sleeve. I wasn't leaving. No fucking way. I planted myself in that waiting room and told her I'd stay all night if I had to. She shrugged and went back to her phone. We sat in silence for almost 2 hours, the only sounds the occasional beeping from beyond the double doors and the soft murmur of nurses changing shifts. I counted the ceiling tiles, read every outdated magazine, and memorized the fire evacuation plan posted by the exit before a doctor came out and said Mia was awake and could have visitors. My sister stood up immediately. I'd like her aunt to come too, she said, surprising me. They're close. The words sounded rehearsed, as if she'd calculated exactly how to appear like the perfect accommodating mother. The doctor nodded and led us both to Mia's room. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Mia looked so small in that hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and an IV. Her face was pale, and her eyes were vacant. Her usually vibrant brown hair lay limp against the pillow, and her chapped lips were cracked with dehydration. When she saw me, though, something flickered there. Relief, maybe, or hope. When she saw her mother, that flicker died instantly. The doctor explained that Mia would need to stay for at least 72 hours for psychiatric evaluation, which was standard procedure for sewer slide attempts. My sister nodded along like this was all routine, like her daughter hadn't just tried to end her life because of her. She even took notes in her phone, as if this were a business meeting. When the doctor left, my sister immediately started in on Mia. What were you thinking? She hissed, keeping her voice low. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Everyone's going to think I'm a terrible mother now. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the cold fury in her eyes. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you fucking kidding me right now? I snapped. Your daughter just tried to cull herself and you're worried about how it makes you look? My voice echoed off the sterile walls, and I noticed Mia flinch at the sudden noise. My sister turned to me with ice in her eyes. You don't know anything about our situation. You've always thought you know better, haven't you? Always trying to take her from me. Her words were razor sharp, practiced barbs she'd clearly used before. Before I could respond, a nurse came in to check Mia's vitals. My sister immediately switched to concerned mother mode, asking questions about Mia's care and recovery. The performance was sickening. She even had tears ready, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a tissue she produced from her designer purse. When the nurse left, Mia spoke for the first time. Her voice was raspy and weak, like sandpaper on metal. I want to go home with Aunt, she said, not looking at either of us. Her fingers picked nervously at a loose thread on the thin hospital blanket. My sister laughed that same cruel laugh I'd heard on the phone. That's not happening. Your aunt doesn't want you. She sent you back, remember? She said it with such casual cruelty, like reminding someone they'd forgotten to buy milk. I saw Mia flinch like she'd been slapped. I couldn't take it anymore. Mia, I'm so sorry, I said, moving closer to her bed. I made a terrible mistake. I should have believed you. I should have protected you. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away slightly, her trust in me clearly broken. My sister grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. We need to talk outside, she said through gritted teeth. Her nails dug into my skin hard enough to leave marks. Once we were in the hallway, she dropped the act completely. Listen to me, she said, her voice low and threatening. Mia is my daughter. Mine. Not yours. She's manipulating you, just like she manipulates everyone. She's sick in the head, and I'm the only one who knows how to handle her. Spittle formed at the corners of her mouth as she spoke, her perfect composure slipping. I stood my ground. She tried to cull herself because of you, I said. I'm not letting her go back to that. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through me. My sister's face hardened. You have no choice. I'm her legal guardian, and if you try to interfere, I'll make sure you never see her again. I'll tell everyone you've been filling her head with ideas, encouraging her behavior. Who do you think they'll believe? The mother or the aunt who's always been jealous of me? Her smile was venomous, confident in her power. She had a point, and she knew it. I had no legal right to Mia, but I wasn't giving up. I went back into the room while my sister stepped away to talk to the doctor. Mia was staring at the ceiling, tears silently streaming down her face, creating dark spots on her pillow. Mia, I said softly, taking her hand. I believe you. About everything. The abuse, the autism, all of it. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you before. My voice cracked with emotion, the weight of my failure crushing me. She turned to look at me, her eyes full of pain. You sent me back, she whispered. Each word fell like a stone between us. Those 3 words felt like a knife to my heart. I know, I said, my voice breaking, and I will never forgive myself for that. But I promise you, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get you out of there. I just need time. I squeezed her hand gently, willing her to believe me. She didn't respond, just turned her face away from me. I couldn't blame her. Why should she trust me now? The steady beep of her heart monitor filled the silence between us. The next 3 days were a nightmare. I visited the hospital every day, but my sister was always there, watching our every interaction like a hawk. Mia barely spoke. The psychiatric evaluation determined that she was at risk and recommended outpatient therapy. No shit, she was at risk. She was living with her abuser. I wanted to scream this at every doctor and nurse I saw, but my sister's threats kept me in check. When it was time for Mia to be discharged, I tried one last desperate attempt to convince the hospital staff that sending her home with my sister was dangerous. I told them about the abuse, the bruises, everything Mia had told me. They said they'd note my concerns, but without evidence or Mia speaking up herself, there wasn't much they could do. The social worker looked genuinely sympathetic, but explained that their hands were tied legally. I watched helplessly as my sister led Mia out of the hospital. Mia looked back at me once, her eyes pleading before they disappeared through the automatic doors. The sound of those doors hissing shut behind them felt like a death sentence. I cried the entire drive home. My vision blurred so badly at one point that I had to pull over, sobbing into my steering wheel on the shoulder of the highway while cars rushed past. When I got there, my husband took one look at my face and just held me while I sobbed. I told him everything. The abuse, my sister's threats, how I'd failed Mia. He listened without interrupting, then said, "We need a plan." His calm determination was the anchor I desperately needed. We spent the next few days researching child protective services, legal guardianship, documentation of abuse. I called Mia several times, but my sister always answered her phone, saying Mia was resting or not feeling well enough to talk. Each excuse was delivered with barely concealed satisfaction. I was going crazy with worry when, 5 days after Mia was discharged, I got a text from an unknown number. "It's Mia, using friend's phone. Mom took mine. Please help." My heart leaped into my throat when I saw her name. I immediately texted back asking where she was and if she was safe. She said she was at school but would be home soon. Her mom had been worse since the hospital, watching her every move, screaming at her for the smallest things, threatening to send her to a special school for problem kids if she didn't act normal. Each message made my stomach knot tighter with fear for her. I told her to hang in there, that I was working on a plan. I asked if she could document the abuse somehow. Pictures, recordings, anything. She said she'd try but was scared of getting caught. The thought of what might happen if my sister discovered her documenting the abuse made me feel physically ill. 2 days later, I got another text from the same number. "Check mail tomorrow." That was it. No explanation. I barely slept that night, wondering what Mia had managed to send. The next day, I practically attacked the mailman when he came. Among the bills and junk mail was a small padded envelope addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note that simply said, "Password, Bluebird 1910. My hands shook as I held the tiny device, knowing it might be our only chance to help Mia. I plugged the drive into my laptop immediately. It was password protected just like the note said. When I entered Bluebird 1910, it opened to reveal dozens of files, audio recordings, photos, and a Word document titled Read First. The organization was meticulous, showing a level of planning that broke my heart. The document was a letter from Mia, explaining that she'd been secretly recording her mom's outbursts for months. She'd hidden an old phone in her room that my sister didn't know about. The photos showed bruises on her arms, legs, and back, each labeled with dates. Some were faded yellow, others vivid purple, forming distinct finger marks. Some of the audio files had descriptions. Mom screaming about stimming, mom threatening special school, mom telling me I'm faking autism. I felt sick as I clicked through everything. The recordings were worse than I could have imagined. My sister's voice, distorted with rage, screaming things like, "Stop that fucking hand flapping or I'll break your fingers," and "No one will ever love you if you keep acting like a R word." I had to stop listening several times because I was shaking so badly. In one recording, I could hear Mia crying softly in the background, trying to muffle the sound while my sister ranted about how embarrassing it was to have a daughter who acted like a freak. The most recent recording was from just after the hospital. My sister could be heard saying, "If you ever try that sewer slide bullshit again, I'll make sure they lock you up in a real psych ward, one where they use restraints and shock therapy. Her voice was eerily calm, which somehow made the threat even more terrifying. I was literally sick to my stomach. I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up, heaving until there was nothing left but bile. This was my sister, my own flesh and blood. How could she be this monster? The woman who had shared my childhood bedroom, who had once comforted me after nightmares, was now the source of her own daughter's terror. I copied everything to my computer, then made another copy on a different drive, just to be safe. I called my husband at work and told him to come home early. We needed to make decisions, fast. The urgency in my voice must have conveyed the seriousness because he said he'd leave immediately, no questions asked. When he got home, we sat down and went through all the evidence together. It was overwhelming. There was no question now. Mia needed to be removed from that house immediately. The bruises alone were damning, but the audio recordings were undeniable proof of emotional and physical abuse. We should go to the police, my husband said, his face grim as we listened to my sister threatening to slap the autism out of Mia. I hesitated. What if they don't do anything? What if they talk to my sister and she convinces them Mia is making it all up? She could destroy the evidence, make things even worse for Mia. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. We debated back and forth for hours. Finally, we decided on a two-pronged approach. I would contact CPS with copies of the evidence and simultaneously consult with a family lawyer about getting emergency temporary guardianship. My husband made coffee as I organized the files, preparing them to be shared with authorities. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day making calls. The CPS worker I spoke to sounded concerned but warned me that the process could take time. The lawyer was more encouraging, saying the audio recordings were compelling evidence that could support an emergency order. I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. I was on the phone with the lawyer when I got another text from Mia's friend's phone. 911. Mom found out. Freaking out. Locked in bathroom. The message hit me like a physical blow. My heart stopped. I told the lawyer I'd call back and immediately dialed 911. I explained the situation. My niece was in danger. Her mother was abusive. She was currently hiding in the bathroom. They said they'd send officers right away and took down my sister's address. The dispatcher tried to keep me on the line, but I couldn't wait. I grabbed my keys and raced to my car. The drive to my sister's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every red light felt like torture. I ran one completely, narrowly missing a collision with a delivery truck. When I pulled up, there were already 2 police cars in the driveway. I ran to the front door, which was open. Inside, I could hear shouting. I found everyone in the upstairs hallway. My sister was screaming at a closed bathroom door while 2 officers tried to calm her down. Her face was contorted with rage, her perfect appearance completely undone. When she saw me, she went ballistic. "You!" she shrieked. "You put her up to this, didn't you? You've always wanted to take her from me." She lunged toward me, but one of the officers caught her arm. One of the officers stepped between us. "Ma'am, please calm down," he said to my sister. Then he turned to me. "And you are?" His hand rested on his belt, near his taser. "I'm her sister," I said, pointing at my sister. "Mia's aunt. I'm the one who called 911. My voice was steadier than I felt, adrenaline keeping me focused. The other officer was knocking on the bathroom door. "Mia, it's the police. You're safe now. Can you open the door?" His voice was gentle but authoritative. There was silence, then the sound of the lock turning. The door opened slightly, and I could see Mia's terrified face peeking out. Her cheek was red, the beginning of a bruise forming. When she saw me, she flung the door open and ran straight into my arms, sobbing. She clung to me like I was a life raft in a storm, her whole body trembling. My sister lunged toward us, but the officers held her back. "She's lying!" my sister screamed. "She makes things up for attention. She hurts herself and blames me." Spittle flew from her mouth as she struggled against the officer's grip. I held Mia tightly as she trembled against me. "I have evidence," I told the officers. "Audio recordings, photos, everything. She's been abusing Mia for years." I could feel Mia's heart racing against my chest. The next few hours were a blur of statements and questions. The officers separated us, Mia and me in the living room, my sister in the kitchen with the other officer. Mia showed them the bruises on her arms, fresh ones from that day when my sister had grabbed her after discovering she'd been recording her. The officer photographed each mark, his face growing grimmer with each shot. I explained about the USB drive, the sewer slide attempt, everything. One of the officers made a call, and soon a woman from CPS arrived. More questions, more statements. Mia was incredibly brave, answering everything clearly despite her obvious fear. She spoke quietly but firmly, no longer hiding the truth. Finally, the CPS worker pulled me aside. "We're going to remove Mia from the home temporarily," she said. "Given the evidence and the immediate safety concerns, we believe it's in her best interest. Would you be willing to take her?" Her clipboard was filled with notes, and she looked at me with cautious hope. "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "That's all I want." Relief flooded through me so intensely that my knees felt weak. My sister was still in the kitchen, now sitting silently at the table while an officer watched her. The CPS worker went in to speak with her. I couldn't hear what was said, but my sister's face went from angry to shocked to defeated in the span of minutes. Her perfect mask had finally cracked completely. When the CPS worker came back, she explained that my sister had agreed to a temporary voluntary placement with me while the investigation proceeded. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would keep Mia safe for now. The alternative was emergency foster care, and even my sister couldn't argue that was better for Mia's image. They gave us 15 minutes for Mia to pack some essentials. I helped her gather clothes, medications, and a few personal items. She moved mechanically, as if in shock, carefully selecting items that clearly had special meaning. A worn stuffed rabbit, a journal hidden under her mattress, a small box of trinkets from her desk drawer. My sister watched from the doorway, her eyes cold. As we were leaving, she grabbed my arm. "This isn't over," she hissed. "She'll show her true colors eventually, and you'll see I was right." Her nails dug into my skin again, but I barely felt it. I pulled my arm away. "Get help," I told her. "Seriously, there's something wrong with you." I meant it sincerely, despite my anger. The person my sister had become was unrecognizable to me. The drive home was quiet. Mia stared out the window, clutching her backpack. I wanted to say something comforting, but what could I possibly say that would make any of this better? The weight of everything that had happened hung between us. Finally, I just said, "I'm so sorry, Mia, for everything, for not believing you, for sending you back there. I will never forgive myself for that." My voice cracked with emotion. She turned to look at me, her eyes red from crying. "You came back for me," she said softly. "That's what matters." Her hand reached out tentatively and rested on mine for just a moment. When we got home, my husband had already prepared the guest room. Fresh sheets, clean towels, a new set of pajamas. My kids were confused and a little scared, but they were kind to Mia, giving her space but letting her know they were there. My youngest offered her favorite stuffed animal for comfort, a gesture that brought the first real smile to Mia's face. That night, after everyone else was asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of wine, trying to process everything that had happened. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "You'll regret this." Classic her, still threatening even when cornered. I didn't respond. Instead, I went to check on Mia. She was asleep, curled up tightly under the blankets. For the first time in weeks, she looked peaceful. I gently closed her door and went back to the kitchen. I knew this was just the beginning. There would be court dates, interviews, evaluations. My sister wouldn't give up without a fight. But looking at that text, I felt something I hadn't hadn't felt in a long time. Certainty. I was doing the right thing, finally. The next morning, I woke up early and made pancakes, Mia's favorite. She came downstairs looking hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she was really welcome. I pulled out a chair for her at the table. "Welcome home," I said, placing a stack of pancakes in front of her. For real this time. She gave me a small smile, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and for now, that was enough. The next few days were a weird mix of peaceful and tense. Mia started to settle in, but she was still jumpy as hell. Every time my phone rang, she'd freeze up like a deer in headlights, thinking it was my sister calling to drag her back. I tried to reassure her, but honestly, I was nervous too. My sister wasn't the type to just give up and walk away. 3 days after Mia moved in, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it carefully, half expecting something nasty. Inside was a journal, Mia's journal. There was a note attached that said, "If anything happens to me, tell the truth." My blood ran cold. Mia had mailed this before her sewer slide attempt, like she was preparing for the worst. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but the note made it clear she wanted me to read it. So after the kids went to bed that night, I sat down with a glass of wine and opened it up. Holy shit. Page after page of documented abuse. Dates, times, what my sister had said and done. Mia had even drawn little diagrams of where bruises were on her body, with notes about how she got them. Mom grabbed arm when I was humming. Mom pushed me into doorframe for looking weird. It was effing methodical, like something a detective would put together. The most chilling part was a page where she'd written down my sister's iCloud password. Next to it, she wrote proof in her account, voice memos, texts to her friend Vanessa about me. This kid was smart. She knew no one would believe her without evidence, so she'd found a way to get it. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my laptop. I hesitated for a second. Was I really about to hack into my sister's account? But then I remembered Mia's face in that hospital bed, and I typed in the password without another thought. What I found made me physically sick. There were voice recordings my sister had made of herself mocking Mia for acting disabled. In one, she was threatening Mia, saying she'd break every bone in your body if you don't stop this autism bullshit. There were texts to her friend bragging about how she'd slapped Mia good to knock the weird out of her. The worst was a video in her recently deleted folder. She was screaming at Mia for humming. Then you could hear a slap and the phone falling. Mia's crying afterward was something I'll never forget. I copied everything to my computer, then to a USB drive, then emailed it all to myself. No way was I risking losing this evidence. I was so angry I could barely see straight. I wanted to drive to my sister's house and hit the crap out of her. Instead, I called her. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting for me to break. "What do you want?" she asked, sounding bored. "Why didn't you tell me about Mia's mental health issues?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed to play this smart. "What? The autism thing?" She laughed. "I told you that's just for attention. All Mia ever needed was a firm hand." She sounded so casual, like we were discussing the weather instead of her abusing her child. "I found Mia's journal," I said quietly. There was a long silence. Then, "You went through her things? That's illegal, you know." Her voice had changed, gotten colder. The threat was quiet but clear. "I also found the recordings, the texts, the videos." I let that sink in. Another silence, longer this time. "You're bluffing," she finally said, but I could hear the uncertainty. "I have copies of everything, Sarah. Everything." I hung up before she could respond. I didn't go to the police right away. I knew how people like my sister operated. She'd twist things, make herself the victim somehow. Instead, I started small. I called our cousin Greg the next day, casually mentioning some concerns I had about how Sarah treated Mia. He was skeptical at first, but then admitted he'd stopped visiting because he once heard Sarah yelling at Mia so loudly it made him uncomfortable. "She was screaming right in the kid's face," he said, "over something stupid, like Mia tapping her fingers on the table. It felt wrong." Next, I talked to our Aunt Diana, who said she'd noticed Mia was always nervous and flinching around Sarah. Little by little, I started building a network of family members who had seen glimpses of the truth. It didn't take long for Sarah to catch wind of what I was doing. She started her own campaign, telling family members I was mentally unstable, that I was so grief-stricken over Mia's sewer slide attempt that I'd become delusional. She sent texts saying I was trying to ruin her out of jealousy, and that Mia was always dramatic. The next day, she showed up at my front door with a fake smile plastered on her face. "I think we should start over," she said sweetly, "for Mia's sake." I shut the door in her face. While all this was happening, I was digging deeper. I checked Mia's school records and found out she'd been suspended twice in the last year for screaming fits and aggression. No one had called me despite being listed as an emergency contact. I called the school pretending to need clarification on my contact info and discovered it had been manually removed by Sarah. The secretary sounded confused, saying, "That's odd. It was definitely in the system before." The biggest bombshell came when I was going through some papers Mia had brought with her. I found documents showing Sarah had been receiving government disability payments for Mia's autism diagnosis, the same diagnosis she claimed Mia was faking. She'd been getting almost $800 a month for over 2 years, money that Mia never saw a penny of. I started keeping detailed notes of everything I discovered, screenshots, dates, names of people I'd talked to. I wasn't just building a case for the police anymore. I was building one for our entire family, for the school, for every system Sarah had manipulated. The CPS investigation was moving slowly. They interviewed Mia multiple times, and each time she came home exhausted and withdrawn. The social worker, a woman named Amber, seemed genuinely concerned but kept reminding me that the process takes time. "We have to be thorough," she explained, "especially in cases where one parent is accusing the other of fabricating abuse." I wanted to scream that Sarah wasn't even denying the abuse anymore. She was justifying it. 2 weeks after Mia came to live with us, our family held a small gathering to honor Mia's recovery. It was my mom's idea. She thought it would help Mia feel supported. I was nervous about it, but Mia seemed to want to go. Sarah was there, of course. She wouldn't miss a chance to control the narrative. Halfway through the gathering, Sarah stood up to give a speech. She talked about how she had always done her best as a single mother and how Mia struggled with reality sometimes. She even had the nerve to cry, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while everyone looked on sympathetically. I couldn't take it anymore. Without saying a word, I pulled out my phone, connected it to the Bluetooth speaker, and played one of the recordings. Sarah's voice filled the room, screaming at Mia, "You disgusting little freak! No one will ever love you if you keep acting like this." The silence afterward was deafening. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. My Uncle Kyle dropped his drink. Sarah stood frozen, her mouth open mid-sentence. The fallout was immediate. My cousin Isabella got up and walked out without a word. My Aunt Diana followed, giving Sarah a look of pure disgust as she passed. My parents stayed, but my dad couldn't even look at Sarah. He just stared at the floor, his face ashen. Sarah tried to do damage control, claiming the recording was taken out of context or manipulated somehow. No one believed her. The cracks in her perfect image were spreading too fast. The next day, my parents called in tears, apologizing for not seeing what was happening. "We should have known." My mom sobbed. "We should have protected Mia." I didn't disagree, but I also knew Sarah had fooled everyone for years. She was that good at hiding her true self. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's carefully constructed life began to unravel. She lost her teaching job after parents complained about having an alleged child abuser around their kids. She was kicked out of her fancy parenting group. Someone even threw eggs at her car. But the most significant significant change was that she'd lost control of the narrative. People weren't buying her perfect mother act anymore. She called me one night sobbing hysterically. "You have to take it all down," she begged. "You're ruining my life." I'd started an anonymous online page called Mia's Voice, where I'd uploaded parts of her journal and some of the recordings, with names redacted. It had spread through our community like wildfire. "You gave me no choice," I told her calmly. "You gave her no choice." I hung up and blocked her number. Meanwhile, Mia was slowly healing. She started therapy 3 times a week with a specialist in trauma and autism. She had nightmares almost every night at first, but they gradually became less frequent. My kids were amazing with her, especially Lily, who appointed herself Mia's personal protector at school. One day, about a month after Mia came to live with us, I converted our spare office into a bedroom just for her. I let her pick out the paint color, lavender, the bedding, galaxy print, and some posters for the walls, mostly anime stuff I didn't recognize. When it was finished, I showed it to her. "This is your room now," I told her. "Not a guest room. Your room. For as long as you want it." She didn't say anything, just hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. The legal stuff was complicated. Sarah fought the custody modification every step of the way, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge granted me temporary guardianship with the possibility of making it permanent after 6 months. Sarah was allowed supervised visits, but Mia refused to see her. No one pushed it. Life settled into a new normal. Mia had good days and bad days. Sometimes she'd shut down completely, not talking to anyone for hours. Other times she'd have meltdowns over seemingly small things, like the wrong brand of cereal or a change in routine, but we learned to navigate it together. I read every book on autism I could find, joined parent groups, and listened when Mia explained what she needed. 3 months after Mia moved in, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a small local charity that supported children with autism. Someone had made an anonymous donation in Mia's name to fund mental health support for kids who'd experienced trauma. Attached was a note that simply said, "She mattered. We heard her." I showed it to Mia that evening. She read it silently, then looked up at me with the first real smile I'd seen since before all this happened. "They heard me," she whispered. "Everyone's listening now," I told her, and for the first time, I truly believed things would be okay. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more court dates, more therapy sessions, more difficult days. Sarah was still out there, still angry, but sitting there with Mia, watching her carefully place that note in her journal, not the one filled with evidence of abuse, but a new one she'd started for happier memories. I knew we'd made it through the worst. Mia wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to live, and that was enough for now.